There comes a point where you stop asking why they didn't see your worth and start asking why you kept offering discounts. We've all been there. Someone walks into your life, lights a fire, makes you feel chosen, then slowly starts to dim your light, take you for granted, and treat your love like it's disposable. And the worst part, you stayed longer than you should have, hoping they'd realize what they had. But here's the truth. When someone consistently overlooks you, you don't fix it by making more noise. You fix it by going silent. You don't prove your value by staying. You prove it by disappearing like they never existed. Today, I want to give you permission to act like he never existed, not to erase your past, but to reclaim your future. This isn't about bitterness. It's about boundaries. It's not revenge. It's reclamation. Let's talk about how to rebuild, reset, and rise. After someone treated your heart like a backup plan. When someone takes you for granted, the first thing they usually steal isn't your time or your love. It's your attention. They get you thinking about them, even when they're not around. You overanalyze their texts, their silences, their behavior shifts. You try to figure out where things went wrong or what you did to make them pull away. But here's the problem. Every second you spend doing that is energy you're giving to someone who has already shown they don't deserve it. Attention is power. And if they're not appreciating yours, it's time to cut them off. Not dramatically, not with a grand speech, but internally and completely. Reclaiming your attention is the first and most powerful way to reclaim your power. We often mistake detachment for coldness or bitterness, but it's the opposite. It's peace. You're no longer trying to convince someone to care. You're no longer chasing closure, affection, or effort from someone who was perfectly okay giving you crumbs. When someone takes you for granted, they're betting on your consistency. They're assuming you'll keep showing up, answering texts, caring, worrying, overthinking. Even as they give you less and less, they get comfortable knowing they can disappear for a day or two, and you'll still be there. That comfort is what you need to take away. The second you stop giving attention to someone who isn't giving it back, the dynamic shifts. You're no longer performing for someone else's validation. You're no longer investing in a connection that's only alive because you're the one resuscitating it over and over. And here's what people don't tell you: acting like someone never existed doesn't mean you didn't care. It doesn't erase your feelings or the moments you shared. It just means you've reached a moment of clarity. You realize that your time, your energy, your presence, it all has value. And when someone takes those things for granted, the only healthy response is to remove them entirely. That's why this mindset is so powerful. Because instead of wasting weeks or months trying to get them to see what they lost, you simply stop offering it. You stop showing up where you're not appreciated. You stop feeding someone who's starving you emotionally. And in that silence, in that space, something incredible happens. You start to see yourself clearly again. You remember what you bring to the table. You remember how deeply you love, how loyal you were, how much effort you gave. And suddenly you're no longer asking, why didn't they see it? You're asking, why did I keep giving it to someone who didn't care? It doesn't matter how charming they were, how good the chemistry felt, or how many cute moments you shared. If someone consistently took your presence for granted, they weren't the person for you. The right person will never need to be convinced of your worth. They'll feel lucky to have you and terrified to lose you. But before you attract someone like that, you have to become the kind of person who stops wasting their best on people who only show up when it's convenient. Acting like he never existed isn't cold. It's clarity. It's emotional maturity. It's realizing that your energy is sacred and anyone who doesn't treat it that way doesn't get access to it anymore. The most attractive thing you can do after someone takes you for granted is not try to win them back. It's to disappear from their world so completely. They have no choice but to sit with the echo of your absence. That's what it means to act like he never existed. Not to forget what happened, but to stop letting it define you. The moment you pull your attention back to yourself, everything starts to shift, and that's when healing begins. Not because he comes back, but because you stopped chasing someone who was never really there to begin with. We're conditioned to believe that closure is something someone else gives us. That in order to move on, we need a final conversation, an apology, or a moment where everything suddenly makes sense. But the truth is, some people walk out of your life without explanation, without warning, and without the decency to acknowledge the damage they've caused. They disappear, they ghost, or they slowly withdraw until you're left questioning what the entire relationship even meant, and waiting on them to come back and tie a neat bow around that chaos. It keeps you stuck in a story that already ended. Closure is not a door they need to open. It's a door you shut yourself, and you don't need their permission to do it. When someone takes you for granted and then leaves or distances themselves, it's incredibly easy to get caught in a cycle of overthinking. You replay everything you said. You wonder if you were too much, too emotional, too available. You start imagining what you'd say to them if they reached out, how you'd finally express everything they made you feel. That fantasy becomes addictive because it gives you a false sense of control. You think that one final conversation will give you peace. But in reality, most of the time it won't. Because someone who couldn't respect you while they had access to you is unlikely to suddenly offer the closure you crave once they've decided to walk away. Closure is about you deciding the story ends. Not because everything makes sense, but because you're no longer willing to live in confusion. You stop needing answers from someone who didn't give you honesty in the first place. You stop justifying their behavior or hoping they'll change. You realize that their lack of clarity is an answer. Their silence is an answer. Their inconsistency is an answer. And once you see that clearly, you understand that you don't need a final moment with them to move on. You just need a final decision with yourself. It's hard to accept that some people will hurt you and never own it. They'll never say sorry. They'll never acknowledge what they did. And if you wait for that apology, you hand them power over your healing. You allow your next chapter to be delayed by someone who doesn't even care enough to turn the page with you. That's the part that hurts the most. Not just that they left, but they left without making it make sense. But that pain can either keep you stuck, or it can push you forward. And forward begins when you choose to close the door, even if they never do. Giving yourself closure isn't about pretending it didn't matter. It's about refusing to let someone else's inability to value you dictate your emotional state any longer. You don't need to hear them say you were enough. You need to believe you were. You don't need them to explain why they stopped trying. You need to understand that their actions already explained everything. That's where your power is, not in their words, but in your decision to stop needing them. So, instead of chasing a moment that may never come, give yourself the closure you deserve. Say it to yourself if they want. I mattered. I gave love. I showed up. And that's enough. You close the door not because they asked you to, but because you're done waiting outside one that was never open in the first place. And once you shut that door, you're no longer the person who's waiting. You become the one who's walking. Not away from them, but back toward yourself. When someone treats you like you're replaceable, it's easy to start believing that you are. You begin to question your worth, especially when you've given them everything, your love, your time, your support, and they still manage to overlook you. But here's the truth: how someone treats you is a reflection of them, not you. Their inability to value doesn't mean you're not valuable. It just means they couldn't see clearly. And that's their limitation, not your identity. When someone takes you for granted, you might think, maybe I didn't do enough. Maybe if I had been more chill, less emotional, more patient, they would have stayed. But trying to shrink yourself into the version of you that someone else might find easier to love is the quickest way to lose the most important relationship you have, the the valence, the one with yourself. You're not supposed to convince someone to see your worth. 8 of your absence, you're supposed to be so rooted in your value that when someone doesn't recognize it, you're willing to walk away without begging them to open their eyes. People often take for granted what they think they'll never lose. If someone assumes you'll always be there, always answering, always forgiving, always showing up no matter how poorly they treat you, they begin to treat your presence as permanent and therefore optional. That's when they stop trying. That's when they stop appreciating your absence. And that's when you have a choice to make. You can either keep showing them that they're right, or you can decide to become the exception to their expectations. Not by pleading, not by explaining, but by disappearing from the life of someone who clearly thought your presence came without boundaries. Your value doesn't drop just because someone failed to see it. Think about it. If someone walked past a diamond on the street and thought it was just a rock, it wouldn't make it any less rare or beautiful. It would just mean that person didn't know what they were looking at. The same goes for you. When someone chooses to take you for granted, they're showing you their lens. Don't make the mistake of internalizing their limited view. You're not hard to love. You're just not beloved by someone who only knows how to love halfway. It's easy to tie your self-worth to how someone else treats you, especially if you've emotionally invested in them. But doing that gives them way too much control over how you see yourself. And that's dangerous, because then their coldness becomes your insecurity. Their distance becomes your self-doubt. Their emotional unavailability becomes your self-blame. That's why it's so important to separate their behavior from your value. They didn't treat you poorly because you weren't enough. They treated you poorly because they didn't know how to recognize, receive, or reciprocate what you were offering. That's on them, not you. The moment you start seeing that clearly, something powerful happens. You stop chasing explanations and start setting standards. You no longer waste your energy asking why they didn't see your worth. You start asking why you stayed in a space that made you question it. That shift is everything. It takes you from powerless to powerful, from reactive to intentional, and from needing validation to knowing you are the validation. Let them think you were replaceable. Let them assume you'd always be there. But don't let their assumptions become your reality. You're allowed to be the one that got away. Not because you wanted revenge, but because you finally remembered what you deserve. When someone takes you for granted, don't prove them wrong with words. Do it by living a life that no longer includes them. That's when you take your power back, not through confrontation, but through clarity. When someone takes you for granted, it's not just your heart that gets hurt. It's your identity that starts to blur. You begin living in reaction to them. Your mood depends on how much effort they're giving. Your confidence rises and falls based on their attention. Slowly, without even noticing it, you stop being the main character in your own life. Your days are no longer about your growth, your goals, or your happiness. They become about deciphering their mixed signals, waiting for a reply, hoping today they'll treat you better. You end up orbiting around someone who isn't even centered in their own life, and you lose your own center in the process. Reclaiming your life means rewriting your story without them in it. Not because they never mattered, but because they don't deserve a starring role in a movie they barely showed up for. The version of you that tried so hard to be enough for someone else wasn't the real you. That was the survival version. That was the you who was performing, people-pleasing, overgiving, and constantly negotiating for love. That version deserves compassion. But she also deserves rest. It's time for the real you to step back into the lead. And here's the truth. Acting like he never existed isn't about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about no longer building your future around someone who never saw it with you. It's about choosing yourself fully and unapologetically. It's about putting your energy back into your own life, your passions, your routines, your dreams. Because when you make someone else the center of your world and they leave or treat you carelessly, You're left with nothing to fall back on. But when you're the star of your own life, nobody's absence can collapse your entire universe. That shift doesn't happen overnight. It's 1,000 small decisions. Waking up and not checking if they watched your story. Making plans without wondering if they'll text. Taking care of yourself without secretly hoping they'll notice. Choosing silence over sending one more vulnerable message into the void. These moments may feel insignificant, but they are acts of power. Each one pulls you closer to yourself. Each one is a quiet rebellion against the idea that your value is dependent on someone else's recognition. There's a beautiful kind of healing that happens when you stop trying to prove your worth and start building a life that reflects it. You begin to glow differently. Not because you're trying to get anyone's attention, but because you're finally aligned with your truth. You start dressing for yourself. You laugh without hesitation. You enjoy your own company again. And that light, the one that was always inside you but dimmed for someone else's comfort, it starts to return. Some people will only realize your value after you've removed yourself from their reach. But by then, it's not your job to go back and teach them how to treat you. Your job is to move forward, to build a life so full, so rich, so yours, that their absence becomes irrelevant. The person who once made you feel invisible becomes just a footnote in a chapter you've long since finished. You become the person who no longer begs to be seen, because you see yourself. The person who doesn't wait for someone else to choose them, because you already did. And when you finally write your life with you at the center, something amazing happens. People either rise to meet your new level, or they fade away. And both outcomes are a blessing. When someone takes you for granted, the instinct is often to react. To text them something that will finally make them see what they lost. To call them out. To post something that stings just enough to get their attention. You want them to feel even a fraction of the confusion or pain they put you through. That's human. That's the part of you that wants closure, justice, or maybe just some kind of emotional echo to prove that you mattered. But here's the thing, the strongest response isn't found in the reaction. It's found in your silence. Not the silence of passivity or weakness, but the kind that's rooted in dignity, clarity, and strength. Silence is not indifference. It's not pretending you don't care. It's choosing not to engage in a space that doesn't respect your presence. When you stop responding, stop explaining, stop performing for someone who didn't value you, you're not disappearing. You're reappearing for yourself. You're saying, without saying anything, I've said all I need to say, and you've shown me all I need to see. It's a boundary in its purest form, and it's powerful because it puts you back in control of your emotional energy. Revenge might feel satisfying in the moment. A message sent at 2 a.m., filled with honesty, or maybe bitterness. A final jab meant to shake them awake. But none of it actually brings peace. What it does is keep the cycle going. It keeps you emotionally tied to someone who has already proven they don't deserve that kind of access to you anymore. You may feel momentary relief, but it's followed by the same frustration, because their response never quite hits the way you hope it will. They still don't get it. Or worse, they do, and they still don't care. That's why silence isn't about pretending they didn't hurt you. It's about no longer asking them to care that they did. You stop needing validation from the very person who denied it when you needed it most. You stop hoping they'll apologize, fix it, or come back better. And in that space of silence, something important happens. You get to hear yourself again. You get to sit with your own voice, your own needs, your own worth. And that voice will always tell you the truth. They weren't showing up. They weren't trying. And the longer you kept responding, the more you were betraying that truth. There's a calm, quiet kind of revenge in peace, in not reacting, in not proving anything, in living well. Not because you want them to notice, but because you finally remembered that you were never meant to be someone's backup plan, emotional crutch, or temporary option. And yes, They may notice your silence. They may wonder why you stopped chasing, stopped caring, stopped showing up. But by then, it won't matter. Because you'll be too busy showing up for yourself. It's hard at first to resist the urge to reach out. Silence feels empty. It feels like you're letting them win. But you're not. You're letting yourself win. Because every time you choose peace over chaos, you build trust with yourself. Every time you say nothing instead of something desperate, you affirm your worth. You're not ignoring them to play games. You're ignoring them to protect your energy. That's a very different kind of strength. Eventually, they'll remember your presence. But by then, you'll be long gone. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually. You'll have outgrown the version of yourself that once waited for breadcrumbs. And that's the real power of silence. It doesn't just punish their carelessness. It heals your heart. It removes you from a game you were never meant to play. And it leads you back to a life where you no longer need to be heard by someone who refused to listen in the first place. When someone takes you for granted, it can leave a scar, especially if you loved them deeply, gave them your best, and still ended up feeling like it wasn't enough. It's natural to carry that pain with you. But there comes a point where you have to decide what that experience is going to mean in the bigger picture of your life. Are you going to let it be a permanent wound that keeps reopening every time someone gets close? Or are you going to let it be the moment that taught you to raise your standards and stop accepting less than what you truly deserve? A lot of people confuse healing with forgetting. They think that to move on, they have to erase what happened or act like it didn't hurt. But you don't need to forget what happened. You just need to shift what it means to you. That relationship wasn't a waste of time. It was a mirror. It showed you what you were willing to tolerate, what you were settling for, and what parts of you still needed healing. It brought the truth to the surfacing that you were overextending yourself for someone who was undelivering. And that love without respect always leaves you empty. The scar is real, but it doesn't have to make you bitter. It can make you better if you choose to let it. It can remind you of the version of yourself that needed to be needed, that thought loyalty meant staying even when you were being emotionally neglected. And that reminder becomes your boundary. It becomes your line in the sand. Because once you've felt what it's like to be taken for granted, it should be impossible to tolerate again. Not because you're jaded, but because you're finally awake to your own value. The next time someone shows up in your life, you'll notice things differently. You'll catch the red flags sooner. You won't explain away inconsistent behavior or excuse emotional unavailability as they're just busy. You'll hold people accountable, and not in a demanding way, but in a grounded, self-respecting way. You won't need to threaten to walk away to be treated well. You'll just walk if they don't rise to meet you. That's what happens when you use the past as a standard setter. It becomes the contrast that makes healthy love impossible to miss and toxic love impossible to stay in. It's not about building walls. It's about building filters. You stop letting just anyone in. You stop handing out access to people who haven't earned it. You're no longer impressed by surface-level charm or temporary consistency. You start asking real questions. Do they make me feel safe? Do they make me feel seen? Are they consistent when it's not convenient? Are they emotionally available or just emotionally needy? That's what raising your standards looks like. It's not about perfection. It's about alignment. You don't owe anyone another version of yourself who's willing to prove they're worthy of love. That version of you has already done enough. Now, your job is to protect her, to honor what she went through, and to make sure she never has to lower her standards again just to be chosen. You're not bitter. You're not guarded. You're just done playing small to stay in rooms where your heart was mishandled. The scar is still there, but now it's a reminder, not of pain, but of power. Every time you say no to what no longer serves you, you reinforce that power. Every time you walk away from someone who treats your presence like a convenience instead of a privilege, you raise the standard again. And eventually, that standard will become your peace. Not because you've found the perfect person, but because you've become someone who will never again beg to be seen. That is how the scar becomes the lesson. And the lesson becomes your freedom. You don't heal by chasing the person who hurt you. You heal by becoming the person they no longer have access to. This isn't about pretending they didn't exist. It's about making peace with the fact that they didn't treat you like you did. You loved deeply. You showed up. You gave more than you got. That wasn't your mistake. That was your strength. But from this moment forward, let that strength serve you. Let it set your standards, not lower them. Let it build boundaries, not break you. Reclaim your attention. Close the door they left open. Remember your worth. Put yourself back in the lead role. Let silence be your loudest answer, and let the scar become your new standard. Because the person who took you for granted never deserved the version of you who stayed, and the version of you that's leaving. She's unstoppable,